So welcome everybody to what I think is our 6th monthly Citizen Science Lab webinar. It's been great to have this series where we can invite people to tell us about the really interesting work that they're doing. And I had the privilege of working with Bep in the LandSense project, which recently concluded, a Horizon 2020 project that was looking at citizen science approaches to land use cover and land use change, and detecting those. And Bep was leading a really interesting pilot within that project, which I got to know a little bit about at that stage, but I know that her research has continued on from there. She's been able to take it next steps and take it in new directions. So we've invited her to tell us today a little bit about the MijnPark project and her research. So with that, I will hand over to Bep.
Thank you, Margaret, and thanks for having me here. Give me a chance to tell you about my research. I'll go straight into the sharing of my screen. Let's see the presentation. And I'm always a bit unsure as to how this turns out. Can you guys now see hang on, what's going on? The presentation in presentation mode?
Now it's presentation mode, excellent.
Okay, nice. Very good. So yeah, I'll be telling you a bit about my research, which is mainly focused around the measuring and mapping of subjective values of urban green space. Now I understand that you guys are all a bit more focused towards citizen science, and what I've been doing is I would think would fall more underneath the crowdsourcing side of citizen science. And sometimes I even think maybe it should be better called citizen sensing, but I'm sure you know enough about the differences there. So a bit more about myself. I thought rather than only seeing a face on the screen, I put another face of myself, picture of myself. So I'm doing a PhD. I'm into my 4th year, I realized, when I was thinking about this. In the Environmental Geography Department of the Institute for Environmental Studies at the Vrije Universiteit in Amsterdam. My main supervisor, big boss, is Peter Verburg, whose name you might know, and Ziga Malek is my daily supervisor. Boris van Santen, who doesn't work with us anymore, he started off supervising me for the first 2 years. So that's why I thought I should put his name there as well. My background is in environmental science, basically bachelor, but I thought it's interesting to put in there because I'm a bit older than a typical PhD student. I finished my bachelor in 2002. So that's when I think back at that, it seems like ages ago. In the meantime, I've worked with invasive species management in a consultancy in Australia, and also with aquatic ecology monitoring, so taking samples of aquatic macroinvertebrates and analyzing them. Also worked on an organic farm. And then when I moved to the Netherlands, I decided I needed to update my education, and I did a master's in earth sciences at the UvA. And then my master's thesis was about ecosystem services, measuring ecosystem services. And so this basically shaped me to get where I am academically. But I thought a nicer aspect of my background, what probably shaped me the most is the place I grew up. And this is Rihanna in Tasmania, Australia. And I knew it was a very small village, well, not many people, but it says here, Wikipedia says 287 residents. So it's quite small, and now I live here in Amsterdam. I'm not sure of the difference in residents, but considering I'm going to be talking about urban green spaces, the little photo that Google itself put up there in the top left corner already says something about the differences in green spaces. But anyway, so that's my background, and I'm actually here to tell you about my work, of course, so I should move on to that. What I want to tell you today is do a very brief introduction into the role of urban green spaces, because that's what I'm looking at. And so you may already understand or know a bit about the importance of green spaces in the urban landscape, but I thought I'll quickly give a quick introduction so I can zoom in nicely into my work. Then I will, as Margaret said, I will give some insights into the projects that I've been doing for my PhD. So one was measuring perception in situ in the landscape in an urban park with the use of an app dedicated to doing just that. And I also compared the use of the app to some other crowdsourcing methods. And then I will also describe a little bit my current project, which I'm trying to finish off now. So I have some results to show, although my analysis hasn't completely been into the full depth that it will be eventually, I suppose. So the role of urban green spaces in the urban landscape, and they have many. Often they're referred to in the context of ecosystem services, urban ecosystem services. This is a little one diagram I found, but if you search urban ecosystem services or urban green spaces, you find millions of these types of diagrams. But basically what I wanted to show here is that health and well-being aspects are also seen as important roles or functions of urban green spaces. And if we look at all the other things that pop up here, functions that pop up here, benefits, whatever, contributions to people, whatever they want to be called, most of them are measurable, but the measuring mental health or measuring well-being and how the urban green spaces can promote that or contribute to these aspects, these social aspects, is much more difficult to measure. So in looking at why green spaces provide health and well-being benefits, I like this diagram. It's a main theory is that we basically need green spaces to feel at home. It's I can't remember exactly what the theory is called, but basically we didn't evolve in cities. We evolved in savanna landscapes mainly, and this probably influences our preferred environments, and the fact that we maybe even need green spaces to be able to function properly cognitively. A lot of research has been done on that regarding depression and anxiety or mental health issues, and people tend to find that green spaces close to hospitals or close to people's residencies actually improve mental health and physical health. But actually exactly how is less well known. Oh yeah, the green spaces are so important, then it is one of an important, it is a sustainable development goal. So by 2030, there should be inclusive and accessible access to green and public spaces, and especially for specific groups of people. But I wanted to focus on this inclusive and accessible because from the literature, I read that inclusive and accessible doesn't just mean you can get there or that it's close to your house. It also means that that you have to be able to do what you need to do there. It meets your the demands of different groups of people. So regarding these more difficult to measure health and well-being aspects, there's been like I said, quite a lot of research into the linkages between urban green spaces and these benefits. And I quite like this diagram by Chen et al, or originally by Hartig, saying that the type of urban green space, the different qualities of that urban green space, but also how much of that urban green space there is, determine then the contact that people can have with that green space with nature, and then it also from that flows the benefits that people can realize from that specific green space. But I just wanted to focus on this this first, what he calls an effect modifier, how you get from the type or the size or the characteristics of the urban green space to the contact and then to the benefits. Here it says things like distance and accessibility factors, perceived safety. When I went to check the article itself, he specifies that it can be perceived distance, perceived accessibility, and other perceived characteristics. So this this effect modifier 1 here is also influenced by people's. It also includes people's perceptions and preferences, and how people perceive urban green spaces, what they prefer, then also influences the contact that they have with nature, and thus also the benefits that they can receive from that nature. But again, this is really difficult to measure. How do you measure what someone perceives or what someone prefers? Now, there's plenty of ways to measure that. The most common has always been surveys. So just going to a park and asking people, or calling them and asking them. That's how most research is done. But in the literature, and also we see it all around us, these new technologies are being declared as kind of an important solution or answer to some of the challenges that come with doing surveys. Doing surveys in the park requires a lot of hours to stand there and talk to people, basically. And these new technologies would be more efficient, they would reach a broader audience, and they also allow in situ measurements, which you can perhaps do if you're surveying someone on site, but it's less easy to do if you're doing a telephone survey. And so this is where we come to the crowdsourcing. In theory, a survey is also a crowdsourcing method. Only using an app, or as active crowdsourcing, or social media as passive crowdsourcing, is probably more generally seen as crowdsourcing, or fitting under this citizen science and crowdsourcing banner. But anyway, how do these new technologies compare to the more traditional ways of doing this crowdsourcing, the surveys? So that's was the aim of my first project, piloting the use of a dedicated app in a park to measure perception and preferences. And then I compared the results provided with the app to surveys I did on site at some of the same locations, but also to a postal survey that had been conducted by the Gemeente Amsterdam. Now, of course, I had some research questions. I wanted to compare the samples. Do each of these methods have similar respondent samples? For research question 1, then I could compare all 3 methods, so the postal survey with the on-site surveys with the app. But for the rest of the research questions, I couldn't use the postal survey because they'd asked different questions. They didn't ask perception and preference questions. But what I wanted to know was, is there a difference between the answers people give about their perception and preferences in the app versus what they tell you if you ask them face-to-face with an on-site survey? So I compared the 2 methods. So the case study was in Rembrandt Park. Why? Rembrandt Park visitor pressure is increasing quite rapidly. It almost tripled in between 1996 and 2013. But it's also surrounded by quite some urban densification plans. I mean, Amsterdam has quite big plans regarding urban densification, and some of that's happening around Rembrandt Park. And due to both the urban densification and the increasing visitors, the gemeente was planning renovations to the park, quite drastic renovations. And so they call it a quality impulse. There's a lot of money being invested in the Rembrandt Park. And so they were really interested in using a new method for public participation, which is, of course, very important for gemeentes these days, and especially for the GroenLinks Raad in Amsterdam. So just as a reminder, probably all of you know Amsterdam a little bit, but I'm not sure if that's true. Rembrandt Park is this little park here. And just for some reference, Vondelpark is very close. Only Vondelpark is used much, much more intensively. And so there's another thing. The gemeente really would like to make Rembrandt Park a little bit more attractive so that they can get some of the visitor pressure from Vondelpark and get people to go to the Rembrandt Park to reduce that impact on the Vondelpark. But anyway, back to what I actually did. So the app had 31 possible locations set up already in the beginning. And the app would then send you to 3 of those locations. You had to go to 3 of them in a random, they were randomly chosen in a random order. And then you were asked questions about each location. And after the 3rd location, also about the entire park. And the questions at the location were then about satisfaction with certain aspects. So satisfaction with the trees or with the facilities, with the paths. And also some more perceptive questions like how noisy is it here? How crowded is it here? And then the entire park, they were asked questions about how satisfied they were with certain aspects of the entire park. And also about something, how much they would like some things to change in the park. Like there's no horeca, there's no cafe in the Rembrandt Park. So one of the questions was, how much do you think the horeca, there should be a cafe in the park? I can't remember the exact wording now. And then most of the questions were then answered on a sliding scale, a Likert scale, from 0 to 4, 5-point scale. Now in the end, it was downloaded 793 times, which is great, but only 154 people actually filled it in. So this is maybe something that's more interesting for you. Why only so many people actually filled it in after they'd taken all this effort to download it? I don't know. And then, so I also did on-site surveys at 3 of the locations used in the app with the same questions, and I had approximately the same number of respondents, at only 3 of those locations. And then we had the postal surveys that had been conducted by Amsterdam in 2018, so the same year. These postal surveys are done regularly, every approximately 5 years, and they use a stratified sample. And the one in 2018 had a bit more than 3,500 respondents. And of those, 103 had said that Rembrandt Park was the park they visit most often. So I thought, okay, this was maybe a nice reference. This group of 100 respondents to the Grote Groenonderzoek, we can then take as a reference user population for Rembrandt Park. Of course, there's lots of limitations to this and questions that can be asked, but it's a start, because we know that not everyone visits the park equally. But so we can't just take the neighborhood population as being the park user population, because some people might use it more regularly and some less often. So the first question was, of course, how do the samples compare? This is a table with percentages for each of the 3 methods. The letters represent significant differences in chi-squared tests. So you can see there's more difference between, there's quite some differences between the app respondents and the survey respondents, mainly then that the app respondents were younger than the survey respondents, but also, for example, that the survey respondents were largely daily visitors, people. So maybe that's just because there's more chance that you come across those people if you go stand in the park. If we compared that to our reference park user population, it only differed significantly with the survey on the visitation aspects. So the survey had more daily users than our reference population, and it had people were less likely to visit alone than the reference population. Also looked at differences in uses. So this is something I could also compare. The graph on the left was already referred to in the previous table, of course. Only here we have an extra category of GGO occasional, and these are people that say they visit the park occasionally, Rembrandt Park occasionally. But GGO regular is our reference population. And you can there see the difference with the daily visitors in the survey population. And if we look at the different types of activities that are conducted there, then you can see that at least the app, the types of activities that people in the app conduct in the park looked relatively similar to those that the reference population did. And then, so I wanted to know, is there a difference in what people, the perception and preferences of the respondents between the methods? And then this is between the app and the on-site surveys only, because there I asked the same questions. So I did multiple linear regression with, as outcome, the score for the different questions. So, for example, if we see the yellow circle is facilities. So the question would be, how satisfied are you with facilities in the park? These are questions that are about the entire park. And you can see that the method, oh no, I can't see it. I had opened the supplementary material to be able to check which were actually significant. But here there's not a real big difference, because if we go to the next one, this is satisfaction with aspects of the location. So, for example, here the yellow circle again is how satisfied are you with play facilities at this location? And here, for almost all of the outcomes, the method explains the most variance. And I think almost all of the, so the ones that are actually more than one coefficient away from zero, they're all significant variables. So this suggests to me that the survey respondents were more likely to give at least extremer responses than the people in the app. This is not necessarily bad, but it does mean that you can't just put them together and say a score of 4 for the survey is the same as a score of 4 in the app. Yeah, we could discuss maybe I'll come with some points as to why I think that might be the case later. And this is then similar results but for the more perceptive or sensory aspects of the location. So how noisy, how lively, how crowded. And with this one, the method was significant in how noisy the location was found. So people using the app found that location much noisier than people answering by the survey. So this is fairly logical finding, because if you're standing there talking to someone, asking them questions, they'll probably have less attention for their surroundings and therefore be less less likely to find a place noisy. I would have expected similar for crowded or for relaxing, but so relaxing and tranquil put together. I put the variables, the questions that were highly correlated, I put together to not have to account for that correlation. Yeah. So the main conclusions of this first step in this comparison is that there is a difference in respondents. So the two methods reach two different user groups. And so maybe they're both good, because the people that you reach with the surveys, you might not reach with the app. But it looked like the app respondents were closer to the reference user group, at least to the user group that was defined, identified by the postal survey, stratified postal survey from the gemeente Amsterdam. There seems to be some response bias in the on-site surveys, and it looks like they gave more extreme answers. So this might be in that purely due to it being a verbal survey, in that if you ask someone, can you rate this location from 1 to 5, they might be more likely to give a 1 or a 5 rather than the more nuanced points in between. Whereas in the app, they could then slide the scale themselves, and so that you might find a little bit more nuance with the sliding scale. Or they were more likely to support a status quo. So this is it's called satisficing, in that they kind of say, so am I satisfied with the benches here? Yeah, it's okay like this, isn't it? It's fine. Yeah, I'm satisfied. And this, according to literature, can be quite closely related to motivation as to why they take part. And so that's an interesting aspect here, in that app respondents already indicate some interest, some motivation in thinking about the park and the environment implicitly in just downloading the app and filling it in. Whereas the people you approach in a park and ask questions face to face, they might not have thought about it so much. They're just on their daily walk and they don't really want to think about it too much. They just enjoy being out of the house. So they might be at least less prepared to think about specific aspects of the location. And so I also found that, especially for noise, it seems that the app might provide a bit more nuance in this sensory perception. And then I want to move on to the next, to the second part of the app, using the app. And I was looking for a link, and I was thinking about the role of green spaces in sustainable cities. So I thought, oh, Google knows everything. I'll just Google it and I'll find a nice diagram. So I Googled sustainable cities, and these were the first 5 image hits in Google. So you can see green spaces are seen as being, at least by Google, as being quite important for sustainable cities. But then this diagram in the middle, the smart cities diagram, caught my attention, and I've seen it before, because in at least in our collective Google image of a sustainable smart city, a lot of things are included, including charging electric vehicle or smart energy, the Internet of Things, intelligent shopping. And I see smart environment included, but I don't see any people. I see the people, like the little people down there, they have little Wi-Fi signs coming out of them, but it doesn't, it almost seems like in a smart city, people don't count. And so I think this is something that's an interesting aspect, because I think in a smart city, is a human habitat is built for us. So ideally in a sustainable city, it would be built in such a way that we can also say something have some influence on how it's built and what happens around us. So why aren't we included in the smart city? So then trying to build a bridge here, moving on to passive crowdsourcing, the use of big data is being kind of heralded as maybe a solution to including humans in the smart city or in these more technological applications, with the idea that if people are uploading tweets or photos or whatever to their social media accounts, it means something about where they are, especially if it's photos of trees or parks or whatever. So this is just an example of a colleague of mine, a former colleague, who used Flickr uploads of landscape photos in an area to kind of use as a proxy for landscape value. So where there were more photos uploaded per hectare, it was considered to be more valuable for, I can't remember, I think he was referring to kind of recreation as a general umbrella term of landscape value. And so this is, of course, this is very interesting, but I was wondering, okay, what can you actually read about perception and preferences, and does this apply then in a much finer scale of urban green spaces? And another former colleague of mine, who I've actually took the PhD over from, she investigated the differences in strengths and weaknesses between passive crowdsourcing, which is the big data, the social media uploads. Okay, you get large numbers of observations, you can get quite a large coverage, all advantages, but we don't know anything about the demographics of the people that are contributing, a number of other weaknesses. And then compared to active crowdsourcing projects like the MijnPark app, you can control the content, you can control the questions, you can control the answers that people give or the information you can source from the crowd, and you can ask some questions about their demographic background. But again, there are some weaknesses. It's quite resource intensive. You need to build the infrastructure, build an app. Another weakness that we're probably all aware of, how do you achieve sufficient participant engagement? And then how do you achieve sufficient participant retention? And there's also selection bias, which, so there's strengths and weaknesses of both. But how do they actually compare? Can you combine them? Do they complement each other? Is one better for measuring certain aspects of perception or preference than others than the other? So that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to compare different crowdsourcing methods. So the passive crowdsourcing compared to active crowdsourcing. So I had the 370 and a bit more observations from the dedicated app, the active crowdsourcing. And then I had the Rembrandt Park didn't have many uploads to social media, which is in itself interesting, but might influence the results. But there were 78 uploads to Flickr. There is a municipal reporting app. So this is an app where you can report a problem. Like if you see a bike that's been parked too long, or a stoeptegel that's crooked, you can report this in the app. So I took all of the reports that had been done in the Rembrandt Park and I filtered them all for reports about rubbish, reports about conflicts between cyclists and people walking, because I wanted to see, can you also use something like this as a almost a passive crowdsourcing for some negative values. So like in the app, when people say, if you ask, is it safe here? They can say no or yes. But if you have the social media uploads, it's almost always only, do you like it here? Yes. You don't get the uploads for places people don't like. So I wanted to use the Municipal Reporting App, Verbeterde Buurt, it was called, for that. And I did observations. I went into the park according to the SOAP Park method, and I observed what people were doing at each of the locations in the app. And then I could compare all of these 3 crowdsourcing methods to the observations. And very briefly, an overview of the results, simple correlation analysis. So there's quite a lot to see here, but what's most interesting is that the social media count, so that's the number of social media uploads within, I think it was 50 meters of each of the locations in the app. It said something about how lively the location was found, but further, and how crowded. So there's a relationship between crowded and lively and social media uploads, but there was no relationship seen between how relaxing, how tranquil, or how noisy. They were uploaded in the more beautiful locations. And surprisingly for the Municipal Reporting App, there were also more reports in the locations that people found more beautiful, more safe, and more relaxing. So where I wanted to use it as a proxy for negative values, it was related to some of these positive values. And what I think happened there is that people report problems more in the places they prefer, maybe. And they're less likely to do that in other locations, perhaps. Or it's what was I going to say next? I'm just quickly looking at it. Maybe we can discuss this later if people find it interesting. And the other thing is compared to observations. So of course, logical, where more people were observed, the locations were found more lively. And where there were more active people, so people that were walking, running, cycling, playing football, whatever, those locations were found less relaxing and less tranquil, but this was not related to people who were just sitting. I think that were the most interesting aspects here. So for the conclusions, when I compared all of these different methods, I concluded that social media can give you a good indication of visitor numbers. So where there are more people, there are more likely to be uploads to social media. And in combination with the Municipal Reporting App, you can get an idea of where there's like pressure points because of those visitors and possible conflicts. The app, the MijnPark app, the dedicated app, is a bit better in this measuring of subjective values. So how relaxing, how safe, how noisy, which is also, of course, quite logical. The observations are useful for finding out what people do where. And together with the app, I could then identify, and this was most interesting for the gemeente, I could identify a number of locations in the park where there were kind of bottlenecks, knelpunten, because there were a lot of people using it. So you would think, okay, there's a lot of people, it must be okay. But in the app, people said, oh, I feel unsafe here, which is surprising if there's a lot of people. Or it's not relaxing, it's not pretty, etc. And so I could pinpoint those locations. I think there were 3 that really stood out. And the gemeente, this was the information that they found most interesting. The gemeente could then take a good look at those locations in their renovation plans, and they actually decided to make changes to the vegetation, to the setup at those locations to solve some of the perceptive problems that the app had identified. So this pretty much concludes the MijnPark adventure. I'm still, this has resulted in 2 papers, and I'm still in the whole actually review process of those papers, so they're not finished yet. So if you want to use any of the results, please contact me first. They're not published yet, but hopefully very close to being so. And then I'll move on to, and I'll try and do this quickly as it's not completely finished yet, but I want to move on to say how some of the things I learned from the app and that whole project and pilot, and how I've adapted it a little bit to my current research. And this was an article, let's see, read 10th of April this year, about how, especially in Corona times, parks have become really important in the city for people, for urban residents. And one of the quotes in that is that, so we're all outside more often, it's become more busy, and parks are being used for all kinds of functions. So for an ometer is just one of those functions. So what I'd found from the MijnPark exercise is that some values, preferences, perception, sometimes I'm not sure exactly what to call the things I'm trying to pinpoint. Some aspects of urban green spaces are more difficult to measure. For example, where people go to relax is possibly much more difficult to measure than where people go to exercise. Because if you do the observations, you see people, either they're doing a boot camp or they're running, or they're going for a stroll, you see them. But I happened to see in the Rembrandt Park some people that were doing a meditation. But they were kind of, I just happened to see them. They were kind of hidden away in like a little more secluded part of the park. So what I was wondering is, how can you properly identify the places that are suitable for the different types of functions? If we look at the ecosystem services approach, things like the ecosystem services like habitat quality, carbon sequestration, water yield, all these more physical, biophysical benefits are easier to measure, but the cultural aspects, the social aspects, a bit more difficult to measure. And then you see that they're trying to be captured, or the researchers are trying to capture it by looking at cultural heritage, or where the paths are. Or what is most often done is all green spaces are considered recreational area, and that is then the ecosystem service. But if we think back to the diagram I showed of all the different health benefits that green spaces have, so there was nature connectedness, social contacts, physical activity, and mental health. There are four different aspects of what you could almost all call recreation. So is it enough to consider all green space recreation area, or should we try and zoom into which spaces are then better for relaxing or mental health functions, and which spaces are better for social functions, etc.? And so, of course, the ideal way to delve into this a bit deeper is to use crowdsourcing again. I used a public participation GIS survey. So you see what I've called here subjective data on the right-hand side. This is the crowdsourcing part. And I asked people, what do you need of green spaces? And which green spaces supply those? And so from these two answers, I could then, do I have a little thing now? A mouse. Can you see my mouse? Yeah, okay, that makes it a bit easier to explain. So this PPGIS is basically the crowdsourcing or crowd sensing. We ask people, what do they need? And I could then make a map combined with demographics as to where there is demand for certain functions, and asking the respondents which locations provide then these particular needs. I could then make a map of the locations where they are, but then I combine this with spatial variables, objective data, in a maximum entropy modeling approach, a bit like a species distribution modeling approach. And from that, I modeled supply maps. So in the end, I had a map of demand and a map of supply of the different functions. And then I could compare these to see where there are trade-offs or multifunctionality in different things. What's going on? Oh, I can't move anymore. Yes. So this is what it looked like up to now. So it's, in theory, it's still open. So ideally, I would like to grow the number of respondents still, but I've done some basic, some first analysis. And so people could indicate specific locations that they use for certain functions. They could indicate whole areas, or they can indicate certain routes that they take. And so I used the respondents. Again, it's not particularly representative. This is an issue that is this is quite difficult. I actually did a random letterboxing campaign in some of the lower socioeconomic areas that I was interested in. And yeah, maybe it helped increasing for example, the number of low-income respondents a little bit, but it still hasn't cricked it up to representative levels yet. And so this is basically what people say they need at which distance. So, and you can see that, for example, play areas looks at first like it's most people don't need it, but that's people without children, of course, they don't need play areas. But otherwise, things like sport and cafes and social interaction are functions of green space that people are more prepared to travel. Either they find them less important, or they're more prepared to travel, for example, cycle for more than 5 minutes, or yeah, more than 5 minutes, sorry. And then what I was interested in was, does this demand differ between people with mental health issues, or people with children, or people with low income? To think of some maybe possibly more vulnerable green space user groups. And we can see here there's quite a difference with people that have mental health issues are more likely to need quiet and relaxing places, but also close by. So sorry, so the first bar is close by. This was just the first graph to see if there were any relationships. And I also did some logistic regression as to whether people need it close by. And then we can see that, for example, the relaxing function, people with mental health issues are 2.36 times more likely to need relaxing functions close by than the rest of the population. Similarly, not surprisingly, people with children in a household are almost 7 times more likely to need play functions so close by. And by close by is a bit subjective also, but the options were close by, I'm prepared to walk 5 minutes, or I'm prepared to cycle 5 minutes. And generally walking 5 minutes is accepted to be about 400 meters. So close by is less, or much less than 400 meters from the house. I'll skip through some of this because I see that I'm using up my time.
Yeah, we've got 5 minutes to go, or a little bit more than 5 minutes to go, and you're sharing so many interesting things, Bep. I want to give everybody a chance to ask a question of you, if it's possible.
Of course.
Let me quickly check with those in the audience if there's any questions that you'd like to ask. You can put your hand up or ask it in the chat, or pop on your video and voice and ask the question directly. one of the first things that occurred to me is how interesting it would be to run some of these data collection methods again during Corona. A combination of people starting to use the green spaces in a different way, but also heightened awareness of their own value of those green spaces.
Yeah, I'm not practiced enough yet, maybe to jump on these opportunities. It would have been so good to do that in a better way.
I see that Andrew has a question as well. Andrew, would you like to turn on a video and voice or ask in the chat?
Hi, yeah, hello. Thanks, Bep. It was really interesting and so much information there. Just pick up on the last bit, what this area you're working on at the moment with this. This is a really interesting area for me. What I'm wondering is when you're looking at essentially trying to measure the impact.
Oh, Andrew's frozen. Is that?
I think he's frozen locally.
Okay.
He looks like he might need to reconnect. Are there other questions from the audience while we're waiting to Andrew to reconnect? Nienke?
I would have a comment, Margaret.
Yes, go ahead, Jens, and then we'll go to Nienke.
Oh, sorry, yeah. So it's quite interesting. I came in with quite different expectations into this call, but it's inspiring because it really relates to a project that I've been doing for 4 years. I'm from Hamburg, from the Hafen City University, and we came in with the expectation to discuss, for example, what are the goals of the activation through the citizen? How do you measure that they will be satisfied with contributing to the discourse of urban space, will go into policy or so forth. But you are very much closer in your recent remarks with our Smart Square in Hamburg. I've just sent the introduction to you guys. We did look at use of public spaces very deeply, and we had multiple approaches. One was we decided not to go for demography, but to go through the phenomena of personas. Then we went into the recognition of patterns of use of that urban space. So it was less than people reporting, but actually observing how they behaved. And we did that, of course. We also used surveys but we also used cameras and photos and algorithms to analyze how movements were. So we could detect if they were slowing down, if they were using it for lunch or whatever. So we could then cluster these patterns. And finally, there was a huge difficulty. We looked at social media analysis to see how they would reference to these different activities or parts of the square or that urban space. Yeah. And I hope you're not too deeply engaged in the photo uploads, because you will not get any connotations out of that. And then if you do the social media analytics, just a warning to save your life or time or whatever. We went through an extensive social media analytics with artificial intelligence to see if we can get connotations out of these short tweets and so forth, and then have it contextual. So it makes actually sense for us to analyze, and it was ultra difficult. But back to my first comment. So we are really interested in how, what are the reasons for people to actually engage, so engaging with your app or giving your answers. What are the expectations? Will they be able to change something? Will they be heard again? Will there be feedback systems? And that's what our current project is about. Now in my background is the old project.
Yeah, I think, well, what was most interesting with the app was that it was about a specific project about their park, which is why it was called MijnPark. And I think this really helped in engagement. And I think if we would have approached it a bit more professionally, or if I'd had already learned some of the stuff I learned in the process, we could have had quite a lot more respondents. But I think the fact that it was about their park and actual plans to make some change, they knew there were plans to change things in the park, that people were a little bit more motivated to actually provide some input. Together with the gemeente Amsterdam, we also had some feedback things like they had a network evenings where I gave a little bit of information about the stuff we'd found in the app, and then the gemeente then told a little bit about their plans, and some of that was then related to things we'd found in the app, and some of it was just things that the gemeente think are necessary. And I think, like I said, if I do it again, it would have been nice to have a few more iterations of co-creation in there, in which questions are being asked, how do you ask, especially the questions about which changes are you happy with, and then also which locations are chosen. So I kind of stepped on the project when that was almost finished. So changing the questions and the approach was a little bit more difficult then. But, and I want to say thanks for the comment about social media doesn't work, is because that's basically what I found as well, except I also see lots of literature saying, oh, it's the answer and it's really a good way because that's the way we're going to get, you know, this, be able to say something about landscape perception or preference or whatever. But I also found it only tells you where there's lots of people and where other people have problems with lots of people.
Yeah, just one
learning in Hamburg and Amsterdam.
Yeah, just a 10-second response to that. One of the issues that we really had was because we looked at the founding square of Hamburg, which is not even known very much to Hamburg people. So we had to look for the terms that actually are quite unknown to them. So we had to look for contextual terms to see if they actually refer to the history or the founding or whatsoever. And that requires more than a tweet. That requires usually up to 3,000 words as a concept to do any kind of analytics. And that's where, it came short.
Bep, can you stay with us for a few minutes longer so we can give Andrew a chance to finish the question he was starting to ask, and Nienke is very patiently waiting. She's also got and I know she's got a very interesting perspective on green in the city too. So Andrew, would you like to finish your question first?
Yeah, sorry, I just got chucked out there suddenly. So very quickly then, particularly interested in this thing about the link between different features, different sort of quality features of a green space and mental health and well-being, and so you were using lots of proxies there really to try and uncover any relationships there. I was wondering if you could use the apps and things to ask more direct questions about people's mental health or well-being when they were experiencing different parts of the green space, or whether there's kind of is more complexity involved in that or not.
Yeah, that's something that I would really like to, and I think is really important at the moment. So what I'm doing now, we did ask some questions in the app about how satisfied are you with the trees, and how satisfied are you with the grass or with the natural vegetation. And an issue there was we didn't ask the question in the right way, because if someone was not satisfied with trees, it could mean that there's too much or too many, or there's too little trees. So the question was just not asked correctly to be able to make any inferences from that. And currently, I have asked it again in this MapShare project, but the focus was really on which locations you use. And now I'm trying to investigate a little bit, is there a relationship then between what they say about the vegetation characteristics and the vegetation characteristics that we know are there? But I haven't moved on to actually trying to link those together yet. I do have several master's students at the moment that are looking into little bits and pieces of this, because it is a really interesting thing. And especially if you want to tease out recreation into the different aspects of recreation, so that any trade-offs between the different recreative functions can be identified. I think it's really interesting to then do this, especially because a field of grass, for example, a grass field of a certain size might be useful for multiple functions, but if it gets larger, it might not be useful anymore for the mental health or relaxing functions, for example. And I think this is really important, especially because, for example, Amsterdam is now busy with, they call it improving the quality of the parks, which basically means making it more suitable for more people, which I'm afraid means that they're pushing out some of these functions and saying, the parks' main function is social cohesion or meeting other people or physical activity, whereas some of these other aspects are then being missed out and even pushed out, I think. So knowing a little bit more about, well, how can you then still make the parks more able to kind of, how do you say that? Take more people, reduce visitor pressure, but still make sure there's little pockets where people can then do the relaxing or the escape, de-stress, whatever, connect with nature, the other things that are also really important. And so then we need to know more about which characteristics are then excluding some functions or allowing other functions to coexist. So sorry, long answer for saying I'm really interested in that, but I don't know yet.
Really interesting to consider deliberate design for different functions. And then the mental health layer that you were mentioning, Andrew, as well, the mindset at the moment that you enter the park and how you experience it and then how you leave the park. Also an interesting comparison.
Yeah, and there's very little information on this because one of my master's students has been looking for this. There's very little.
So fresh territory.
Yeah.
Nike, do you have a question for or something to share as well?
Yes, two very short practical questions. Just for context, I'm a first-year master's student, PhD student, and I'm busy setting up a citizen science project looking at pavement plants, or some people call them weeds. So it kind of touches on your research, but I'm trying to pull that connection to nature outside of the park and more into the whole living area of people.
Yeah, cool.
And I was wondering, how did you how did you market the app or spread the information about the app so people would participate? And do you have a gut or experience feeling about the difference of the demographic of the people using the app? For instance, would they be a younger audience? And the people that stopped first doing a survey, would they be like people that have more time, so they're not working a job, or they're looking out for their children, so they have a moment to answer the survey?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So the first question, we used almost entirely social media, so mainly Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. And I think what actually captured the most, at least downloads, when I followed the downloads that came after a certain social media activity, it was the social media activities from the gemeente itself that's caused the most downloads. And some posts in like the buurtgroepen in Facebook, like the neighborhood groups, they're really focused. So they're really hard to find, I found, because you need to know, is it the Friends of the Sloter Park, or is it the Sloter Park blah blah blah, or you need to kind of find, or you need to know them, and then you need to ask if you can join the group before you can post there, or you need to contact an administrator. So that's a little bit difficult. What I was thinking more recently is if you're interested in a certain area, so then to try and access some social networks somehow. So you need to find the people that then can then know these groups that can then access the rest of the people. And especially if you're wanting to reach the classical non-responsive groups like the non-Western migrants or the lower educated groups, to try and find some ways, some people that are key in that. So
I think those are great answers. Thank you so much.
No.
Yeah,
no, but you asked had a second question, right? Or no? There was
yes. Do you have like a gut feeling about the demographic, about the users of the app or the respondents to the survey? But I think if you spread the app using the gemeente and the buurt initiatives, the local initiatives, then you might not have gotten that younger audience that's like very super active on social media.
No, we did in both the app and in the maps I'm doing now, there is more younger people than older people. And especially compared to the surveys that I did in the park, there were more older people than younger people. So it's it does seem to get this younger group better, which was for the gemeente. It was interesting because all of their netwerkbijeenkomsten, their information evenings, they were getting the usual suspects. So the older white pensionados, that always have something to say. So the app does help to reach these younger groups and families, perhaps people that don't have time to go to a meeting, but do have time to spend 5 minutes on their telephone and give some answers. And I see another question from Andrew. You said your Rembrandt Park observations were based on a specific method. Oh yeah, the SOPARC, SOPARC. I can't remember what the acronym is for now, but physical activity and recreation, something.
What you were just saying about the different outreach methods reaching different groups, Jens, I'm curious if your experience in Hamburg is also similar, if you saw these kinds of different channels for different groups or different response rates.
Actually, because we had a reverse project, we observed who was there and how they were using and then clustered. We did not have to pull them in because we just wanted to see if something changes when we install cultural storytelling. And so we did. And then we had specific events happening, which were organized by cultural institutions and so forth. So yes, there was a certain target group. But we did not reach out through social media. We observed through social media as much as we could and through the physical location usage.
We've got a nice small group now. I wonder if Julia or Janke would like to join in with a question or a comment. Or further observations.
And I'll quickly put my email address in the chat for if anyone, because I didn't get to the end of my presentation where it is.
You had so much rich findings to share. Thanks so much.
Long because I really did not have time to run it. Usually I like to run it through, but thanks to, like I said, snotty kids at home, I did not have the time to do that.
Oh, and you also responded very quickly to our request for this week, so that was lovely. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so that's what
yeah. But I think we'll call
Margaret,
it a wrap.
Julia is part. Julia is part of our new team for NRadar for the Urban Arena team. So
fantastic! So you're part of the team.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Fantastic. So thank you for sharing those details with us, as well as such a great in-depth look at your research lab. Super interesting, especially where crowdsourcing has the potential to tip into citizen science practices. But it's nice to see that crowdsourcing itself already has such engagement power and rich insights into issues that you don't otherwise capture.
Yeah. Another thing, when Jens was mentioning the observing people and photographs and things like that, I was also playing with the idea of a bit more citizen science aspect of a similar thing and getting people to take photos of like having special places that they would go take a photo at certain moments to see what people are doing and where. And in the LandSense project, I tried to get a second iteration of the app happening, where that was one of my wishes, that people could go to a location, say what they feel, their own perceptions, and then take a photo of what people are doing there to have as an extra aspect or observations.
What is it is possible. Just keep in mind that very few percent of tweets or whatever have any kind of location data. So they always have to reference it in what they actually take as a picture. If they commented, and then it needs to have a terminology that is location baseable in a way. Otherwise, it gets lost in the space because, I mean, in the park, the trees look like trees from another park. That makes it even more complicated. But even for us, with quite distinct buildings, it was not easy to detect where they actually took the photos and what the reference was. No,
so this would only be possible with a specific app, probably with like the MijnPark app, because we also ask people to take photos. So in theory, the same app would then also be able to have a little questions. How many people do you see doing different things, and then a photo of people. Then you have privacy issues. Are you allowed to take photos of people? In some countries, that's really difficult, like in Austria. And
that's what I mean. Sorry. Go ahead, Andrew.
Sorry, Jess. I've recently done a photo elicitation study in the UK, and it's purely qualitative. But I can see how brilliant it would be to combine these techniques, a qualitative aspect with the approach you're taking. That would be a superb thing to be able to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would. Sounds like a nice next step to take to build on this.
If you permit one comment on basically with the privacy issue, for example, quite a few years ago in Paris in the Living Labs, we organized that for measurement of noise in the area around Bastille, people would get through the tourist office just basically for free. They would get a kind of sensor, and they would walk around, and the sensor and the system provided additional touristic information. This is the same kind of principle. So it was an opt-in, right? And the same principle is applied in many museums with indoor navigation, with iPads or any kind of device handed out. And then you ask for something in response. So it's a huge opt-in opportunity. So that's the other way of going.
Yeah. I was also referring to the fact that taking photos of people, if you were doing like a photo project where you're taking photos of people, that would be besides the aspect of asking people questions about the demographics or where they go. I come from the city with the toughest watchdog on public privacy, on privacy issues in Germany, and so we actually even made sure that all the camera we didn't even store the video. It had to go through an algorithm of taking all kinds of aspects of faces out and so forth. We couldn't even touch this that kind of discussion point.
Yeah, I remember hearing of a developer team in the UK developing smart software that automatically blurred faces.
Yeah.
So that any imagery taken would automatically blur faces. It's an interesting parameter to work around. Yeah. Well, thank you again for all of you for your time to joining us today, but especially to Bep for sharing this research with us and the outcomes. Really fantastic.
Glad to do it, and sorry I didn't get through all of it.
There, it's 4 years of work in 1 hour. That's a challenge, anyways. Yeah. So thank you so much for being with us, and thank you all. We hope to see you at a future webinar.
Thank you.